Tin Men, written by Linda Coles and narrated by Aoife Mcmahon. Chapter 1. 1 year earlier. He ate his cereal, his 2 young boys in their high chairs by his side at the table. Part of him wished he'd had them earlier in life, perhaps when he'd been in his late 20s or early 30s like his friends had. The noisy part of the young boys' lives would then have been at a time when he'd been able to cope better, was less distracted with work and other issues. But right now, he was conscious of how draining their exuberance could be, particularly when his head was someplace else. He craved peace and escapism. He watched Jo, all the time chattering to the youngsters, encouraging them both to eat up and become strong boys as she fed them simultaneously. Through the window of the spacious kitchen, the morning sun streamed in, and he noticed the minuscule particles of dust floating lazily in the air around her and the boys' heads, the light catching his wife's highlights and the ever-present twinkle of her eyes. He'd struck lucky when he'd met Jo. After being married for nearly 10 years, they'd decided it was time to start the family they'd both been putting off, mainly because of work. As a lawyer, Stuart had had no choice but to put the hours in. It came with the territory. And since Jo had worked at the same firm as a legal secretary, they'd more or less made it their way of life together. Each understood the demands of the other's role, and that made their relationship work, despite the grueling workload they each undertook. And that understanding carried itself to their home life too. With Jo about to resume her position after an extended maternity leave, Stuart would find himself in front of the cooker of an evening just as much as Jo would. The thought depressed him a little. He was getting too old for the constant demands on his time and had enjoyed the little extra solitude he'd stolen here and there while she'd been off. But Jo wasn't one to sit at home all day with nothing to occupy her acute legal mind. Endless coffee mornings and lunches with the girls were as far away from her ideal as a wet weekend in Bognor Regis. Stuart often wished it were otherwise. It would take the pressure off. He was aware she had spoken, and he hadn't answered. "Sorry, did you say something?" Her smile was always a bright one. Rarely was Jo ever cross or grumpy. "I said you look miles away, and you obviously were. Any place nice?" Soon he would be. So soon.
Oh. Sample complete. Ready to continue?